disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Welcome back to you all. I hope you have your fans at the ready. I hope you are sufficiently caffeinated for the final leg of this afternoon's session, where we will have an engaging discussion about the EU's love for startups and SMEs as part of this year's Competitive Europe Summit, brought to you by Politico Live. My name is Samuel Stolten. I'm a reporter at Politico covering competition and tech, and I'll be moderating this afternoon's panel, where we shall explore the EU's plans to facilitate access to capital for companies that wish to expand, how much risk the EU is taking in financing emerging technological projects, and the relevance of other initiatives in the EU's broader goals here, such as the Capital Markets Union and broader public-private partnerships. To discuss all of this and more, we are very pleased to be joined by a range of those working at the forefront of these issues today. Joining us virtually, we have Carme Artigas, Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence in Spain, Laurie Fleuret, Deputy Director at La French Tech. We also have Jean-Laurent Granier, Chief Executive Officer at Generali France, and Jean-David Malot, Director at the European Innovation Council and Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Executive Agency at the European Commission. For those of you in attendance, both in person and online, we'd love to pose some of your questions to the panel this afternoon. So please log in to the Swapcard app and submit your questions there. And don't forget to get involved in the debate on Twitter using the hashtag #PoliticoCompetition. So, without further ado, I think we're just about ready to jump into our discussion this afternoon. And perhaps we could turn to you, Carme, in Spain, and tell us a bit about the picture of how things are going over there at the moment, because you've made efforts, of course, to increase the digitalization of SMEs, and you're very much pitching yourself as a startup nation. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about what's going on in Spain.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this great panel with my colleagues. And yes, as you have mentioned, for us, SMEs is a very important priority. First of all, because in the Spanish economy, SMEs have a very important weight. They account for 98% of total number of companies and employ more than 60% of the workers. So the transformation of our productive model towards a more digital economy implies necessarily the modernization of SMEs. We need to boost their efficiency, their productivity, their competitiveness, and their international expansion. So the key project for this digitalization of SMEs is what we call the SME Digitalization Plan that has 4.6 million euros from the Next Generation EU funds, with the goal to digitalize 1 million SMEs. And taking this into account, we really expect that digital transformation can increase the productivity of Spanish SMEs by 15–25%. So we have deployed a very particular program. Out of these 4.6 million euros, we are devoting 3 million euros to the Digital Toolkit program. This is an economic aid program that allows SMEs to access a large catalog of digital solutions as a service, cloud-based, that they can subscribe along 1 year. So it's not like one-off investment and one-off payment. It's enrolling them in 1 year transformational journey. So just in order to be able to have this level of capillarity, because the challenge as a public administration is not only to mobilize this huge amount of money, but also to make it really accessible and targeted to the right companies. So we had beforehand, we could be able to deploy this program. We had a very important internal modernization project at the electronic administration level. So we have operationalized all the documentation that we are traditionally asking the SMB when they ask for a subsidy. And for example, in Spain, you need to ask the SMBs to provide 36 documents before they can apply for a subsidy. So thanks to our investment in artificial intelligence and in robotic process automation, we have been able to ask them 0 papers, 0 document. We are accessing them absolutely online, and we are also collaborating with the private sector in validating the legible documentation. So the success is huge. We have just launched the first tranche of the program. It's 500 million euros for companies between 10 and 49 employers. And in 2 months, we have already resolved 62,000 subsidies in weeks. And that accounts for more than 60% of the potential target. So it is a success, an unprecedented success of any other program we have heard about, not in our country, on another country. We traditionally have a level of acceptance of maximum 25-30% of a subsidy from the potential users and those who effectively ask that subsidy. So we have already, in just 2 months, 62,000 companies. That accounts that they receive a bonus of 12,000 euros to spend it on this marketplace. And now already have delivered 123 million euros in this year and in 2 months. And they can spend that not in 1, 2, 10, 50, 100 potential providers, but in 8,000 registered digitalization agents. So the SMBs are recipient of the bonus, but they can spend it in another SMB that can be their digitalization provider. So the key success factor has been facilitating the application process to the SMBs by focusing on innovation and our own digitalization for the public administration. We have worked with these RPIs, automatic application processes, data collection from companies, AI integration in administration, so reducing administrative burden, administrative barriers. A paperless administration allows for greatest accessibility for all. So I think that the key message of this experience so far is that a smart administration is in synergy and collaboration with the private sector, and that is the key success to allow for digital transformation of the economy.
Great, thanks, Carmen. And if I could just follow up to you, actually, and ask perhaps about the, not necessarily blind spots, but the areas in which the Spanish government would like to do more, because, of course, we can throw money at SMEs and startups and things like that and encourage investments into next-generation technologies. But what about things like bridging the connectivity divides and making sure that people have digital skills? I mean, are these important areas too?
Absolutely. We are deploying a very comprehensive program that is called the Digital Agenda, where to have like 10 big projects. One is connectivity. We are aiming to have 100% coverage, no gray areas in the whole territory before 2025. We are also committed to the deployment of 5G infrastructure and also special plans on the visual sector. These 3 plans are in the hands of my colleague, Secretary of State of Telecommunication, and our Secretary of State of Digitalization and AI is responsible for the modernization plan of the public administration, the SMEs digitalization plan, and as you mentioned, well, the National Strategy on Artificial Intelligence, where we focus on artificial intelligence, quantum computing. Also the data economy, where we are deploying the Gaia-X chapter in Spain, and very especially, of course, we are responsible for the startup law. We can talk about this later. But very importantly, what you have mentioned, the national plan for digital skills. We still have 33% of the population with no basic digital skills. And especially SMBs also need to be accompanied to adopt the skills necessary that the market already demands. And in this moment of time, we have 4 times more demand of skilled workforce than existing offers. So we are already deploying this national plan of digital skills starting second half of the year.
Interesting. And some of the points you raised there, Carmen, made me think of the EU's Digital Compass plans for 2030, but maybe we can come back to that a bit later on. Jean-David, perhaps turning to you now for a bit of a Brussels perspective here, and obviously you're representing the European Innovation Council today. Your body has actually come up under a bit of criticism recently from certain members of the European Parliament who have brought to light a series of frustrations over delays with regards to getting financing and money to SMEs on the ground. And this is something that I believe the Commission itself has also admitted to. Can you say anything more about why these delays have actually happened and perhaps what the EIC is looking to do to remedy them? We don't seem to be able to hear you, Jean-David. Perhaps the microphone?
Apparently I was muted, so sorry for this.
Great.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do indeed.
Great. No, and sorry for the noise because I am in a place where we love SMEs because I am currently in Vivatech in Paris, as you know. So, thanks a lot for the invitation, and I would like to come immediately to your question. In fact, the European Innovation Council, to a certain extent, is victim of its success. We launched this initiative as a pilot in 2019-2020 with the objective, in fact, to tackle a market gap, which was this difficulty of our investors to support the rapid scale-up of our deep tech startup and SMEs. And we launch a new initiative which has the purpose, in fact, to, for the first time, invest directly in the capital of this type of companies in 2019-2020, and by providing them blended finance support, which is a mix of grant and equity. We have been able, in only 1 year and a half, to select a bit more than 140 startup and SMEs, and to take decision of investments of more than 640 million euros. So it was certainly not a failure, but a huge success in a very short period of time. Now, when we launched Horizon Europe, where the EIC became a fully fledged program, we had unfortunately also to tackle a crisis of growth, because to become such a big fund in such a short period of time required to review a number of procedures regarding the way indeed we are able to monitor the number of investments that we have and the number of board seats that we have already now in a number of companies. But we went through this, and the good news is that yesterday in Paris we have announced the first new investment in a very promising startup, which is Cypearl. Cypearl is a company which is supporting, in fact, the emergence to the market of high performance, low power European microprocessor, for exascale supercomputing, and this is exactly in the line and in the spirit of what is the purpose of the European Innovation Council, which is clearly to contribute to the technological autonomy of Europe, because we will not be able at the European level to have an industrial autonomy if we have not a technological autonomy. And now we are back on track. You mentioned the criticism of the Parliament. I would say, on the contrary, that Parliament is very keen to support the EIC, but is a bit worried by a number of difficult procedures that we have to tackle with, and is ready to help in order to ensure that the EIC is delivering its full speed, as it was already the case during the pilot.
Great, thank you very much, Jean-David there. You mentioned technological autonomy, technological sovereignty, these types of terms, rather nebulous in their nature, but perhaps that's something we can come to a bit later on, because it's somewhat hard to define that terminology more broadly. But I'd like to bring in now Jean-Laurent Granier from Generali France. And Jean-Laurent, this panel is, of course, about the EU's love for SMEs. But of course, this term is also quite hard to nail down. What does this love actually mean in practice? Does it mean lots of money? Does it mean less of a regulatory burden for SMEs? Is it about, perhaps as Jean-David seems to suggest there, is it about being an active market player in Europe, but also globally as well? What does the picture look like for Europe's banking and fintech and financial services firms?
Well, thank you for your question, and thank you for having me and the Generali Group at this very interesting panel focused on SMEs. I have to say that starting that as a leader in European insurance, Generali Group is particularly interested in SMEs because SME is for us a very key strategic segment, very relevant to us, and it is the sector where we write the majority of our B2B or corporate business contracts. We are much more focused as Generali on SMEs than on large corporates. It represents at the scale of the Generali Group in Europe more than 4 billion euro annual global turnover. And we have, for instance, 50,000 SMEs as customers in France. And when we take all the small and independent units, it increases up to 500,000 customers. So in our strategy, clearly focusing on SMEs and being for them the lifetime partner is something which is extremely important, major in our vision of our role in the global economy. I have to say that we have two different roles as insurer. Of course, protect the activity and accompany the customers in maintaining, protecting their activity as an insurer, but also having a critical role in terms of institutional investor. And those two dimensions are coming together. Just to give you an order of magnitude, we have launched an initiative at group level which is called Fenice 190, and we have already invested 1 billion euros dedicated to SME and real economy. And in the upcoming 5 years, we intend to invest 3.5 billion euros more in this area of SMEs, digitalization, innovation, infrastructures, and so on. Also in France, for instance, I'm in charge of Generali France. We are really committed in all the various public-private fund initiative launched just after the pandemic context to support recovery, such as recovery loans and recovery bonds that have been launched by the French government, for instance, to support those SMEs in the post-pandemic crisis. And we have, some very important initiative dedicated to the French tech, such as the TB initiative that also we are engaged in. So this is, globally in terms of investment, what we do and what we intend to do. Our view is that the regulatory framework overall and the support of the institution for SMEs has already improved, but much remains to be done. Notably, the Capital Market Union package, which has been proposed as some interesting options for SME, but we need to make easier for them to raise capital across member states. Also, I have to say that as insurer, we welcome the support of the European Commission intention to evolve our regulatory and prudential framework, Solvency II revision, in order to support better investment in the long term, in the real economy, and also to have this coming along and in coherence with the green and digital transition. In this aspect, of course, a better treatment in our prudential framework, Solvency II, of long-term equity investment, better capital treatment for investment in real economy and SME will be very important. So this love for SME has to be translated into a practical, concrete decision in order to ease the funding, the financing for SMEs, in order to help us as institutional investors to be at the forefront of this battle to provide capital and financial support for SME developing initiative. I would like to have a word also on the ESG framework at large. I mean, I think that the SMEs in Europe, they have a genuine and a growing awareness of the ESG challenges. And they know that they will be increasingly dependent on a sound ESG reporting to secure some activities, some contracts, and some funding. So we need to incentivize those SMEs to make progresses, to take steps on that front. And as a group generally has launched many initiatives in favor of the sustainable growth of SME. The most significant one is called the initiative Enterprise that we have launched in 2021. We were in the middle of the COVID crisis, and we have engaged at group level 6,000 SMEs. The idea there is to reward the SMEs that have the best awareness and the best translation in concrete action of sustainable behavior, sustainable initiative. In France, this initiative has been supported by the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Bruno Le Maire, and by Mrs. Olivia Grégoire, another minister that was at that time in charge of sustainability. And we want, with this initiative, to first of all, recognize the effort that SME can do. We want to create a pan-European platform to give visibility to sustainable SMEs, the ones that are fully integrated in their approach in developing their business, this criteria, this awareness, this focus on sustainability.
Let's pick up your point there, Jean-Laurent, about the French government's enthusiasm here, obviously, for startups and SMEs. And I think this is a great opportunity to bring in Louis Fleuret, Deputy Director for La French Tech here. If you are still with us, the connection's a bit shaky. Perhaps you're in Viva Tech as well. We don't have you here. Okay. Hopefully he will come back in a moment's time. But I just wanted to ask, actually, following on from some of those points, clearly, across a number of different governments in the European Union, there has been a concerted effort to invest in SMEs and startups to compete on the global stage, and other countries have been less perhaps willing to do so. Carmen, should we be bringing up our startups and SMEs to be able to compete with other global firms, for example, from the United States or from China, etc.? Or should we be looking more to level the playing field in terms of fair competition in the internal market here? Or is this a false binary, for example? What's your take on it?
First of all, of course, we need to invest in startups. They are the key for the future development, economic sector growth, and of course, high qualified work skills. And this is why in Spain we are just in the very latest phase of the parliamentary process to approve the startups law, a law that is unique because it's the first legislation that recognizes the uniqueness of this type of companies that have absolutely different dynamic of growth. They compete globally in day one. They attract talent globally also. And we wanted to give also visibility to the startup ecosystem in Spain that already accounts for more than 10,000 startups last year, a record figure, able also to mobilize more than 4 billion investments. So with the startup law, we want to become the top edge at the European level on attractiveness for those entrepreneurs. We are regulating and making more flexible the activities that startups need to correct with administration, have, of course, tax benefits, improved tax regime for non-resident income tax, the digital nomads visa, also a special carried interest treatment and stock option that was really a long-term claim from the sector. But apart from this, we want also to invest in scale-ups. So really the problem we have in Spain is not the startups, it's the problem that those startups need to grow bigger. They go to Series B forward. They don't have the money, not only in Spain, but also in Europe to really scale up. Is in that moment of time when we miss all the talent, when we miss all the capacity to make unicorns from Europe, because they are, I would say, cheaply sold to US companies, US funds, and of course, Chinese or Japanese funds or companies. And that is what they need to tackle. This is why we have launched a unique initiative, which is the next Tech Fund. The Next Tech Fund is a public-private fund of funds with 4 billion investments. And what we really want is to devote those investments in deep tech and deep science, really creating an ecosystem which is solid in long term, not just, I would say, something that creates a hype and then it can, the bubble can be punched in 3 years. Really want to create a new infrastructure for talent and for innovation. So we will focus on investment in deep tech, and it is like AI, IoT, cloud computing, quantum, blockchain, cybersecurity, and whatever. And just in 5 months' time, we have already announced 2 transactions. We have already helped building up a 250 million fund with a national public investment of 70 million. And the second one is a 300 million fund devoted for technology for sustainability, where our Next Tech Fund has provided 100 million euros. And just with these 2 operations, we have already built the 2 largest funds in Spain to invest in deep tech. We didn't have anyone larger than 100 million. And that's already 2 funds at the size of 300 million. Mm-hmm. I think this initiative shouldn't be an isolated initiative from Spain. Should be a coherent initiative and a coordinated initiative at the European level. This is why we are also very active in promoting this alliance called ESNA, the European Startup Nation Alliance, where Portugal, Austria, and Spain have been the founding members. But at this point of time, already France, Czech Republic, and I think Poland are joining, and also more 15 companies have committed. Because that's what we are doing, like a benchmarking. We are doing what we are doing best, learning from the others. And through ESNA, we are already in conversations with the European Investment Fund, also under the presidency of France. There was this initiative that we are fully supporting, which is promoting the creation of a European fund of funds, aiming to boost even more the investment in the growth phase and targeting for a 1,000 million funds size.
Thank you,
I
Carmen.
think that's the way to really
just to come in here, because I'd like to bring in Jean-David here, because I can see him nodding his head there gleefully at some of the things that you're saying. How critical is this stage, Jean-David, between startups and scale-ups? And of course, coming back to your use of the term technological sovereignty, how much does that term play into this whole debate of creating firms that can actually compete globally in the future?
No, so thanks for the question. What was just said is absolutely relevant, and I just would like to illustrate this by a number of things. If you look, for example, of the top 50 companies, be it in terms of valuation or in terms of turnover, and you make a comparison between Europe and the US and Chinese, you can see 2 different things that are very speaking by themselves. First, the European companies are more or less the same than the ones that were there already 20 years ago. The American one, more than half of them have changed. The Chinese are all new. A huge majority of them are coming from areas that are, in fact, driven by deep tech, or at least digital. And at the end of the day, this has also a direct impact on the way we live. So on the way our society is evolving. So this is why, and I'd like there also to answer to your previous question, it's not only because we would like to support our startup to scale up for the purpose to be able to compete in a fair way, as you mentioned yourself, Samuel, at world level. It's because also in the new areas that are emerging in different parts of the economy, if we are not among the leaders, I mean, this will have also an impact on the way we live in our model of society. And we have a model of society in Europe, which is common to the European countries. And this is why I absolutely welcome what was said by the minister a few seconds ago, that by definition, because we have the same objective, because of course we have our own particularities, I mean, we should build things together. What was announced by the French presidency on the 8th of February, this idea of building the foundation for a 100 billion euro sovereign fund is going into this direction. And this is something that evidently we can only do all together. It cannot be implemented in isolation by one or another country, or even less at the level of the Union, without the involvement of each and every country. And this is something that could make a huge change, because another key dimension, which is linked to the topic of the title of your session on the love of startup and SMEs, is also linked to the problem of how we ensure that while we provide them with means in their scaling up, we are indeed tackling the capacity that these companies remain European, that this technology remain European, because they have otherwise, I mean, and we have felt it, in fact, in our flesh in the last two years. This could have a huge impact on our economy, on our life and society, like we feel it during the pandemic. If we have not this capacity of resilience, this capacity of driving, in fact, our own autonomy, and I can speak about sovereignty, but everybody understand here, this is a real issue also for our citizens. So this is why, I mean, investing in technology, investing in talents, in our innovators, in our investors, in our researchers, makes a lot of sense in order to secure the way we live in Europe and for the benefit of our citizens.
Thank you very much, Jean-David. I'm being ushered out of the session as we're coming to the end of today's panel, but I'd just like to do a very, very quick tour de table, maybe with some summarizing comments from the three of you, no more than a couple of sentences, if at all possible, because we're a bit tight for time. I'd like to really know more about what this love represents for you, the EU's love for startups and SMEs. What is it really about? Is it about public-private partnerships? Is it about reducing the regulatory burden? Is it about money, or is it about, exporting the EU's cultural values further and further afield? And perhaps I could turn to Jean-Laurent first for your concluding remarks.
For 2 or 3 sentences only, I think it's very much about fostering innovation and supporting them, those SMEs and startups, in the ESG awareness and transition. And just a concrete example and illustration, in the post-pandemic crisis, we as Generali, we decided to team up with 3 other majors, Sanofi, that you know well, Capgemini, IT and data processing company, and Orange Telecom company, to create an accelerator for digital health startups, helping them to get at scale, to move from startup early stage to able to compete new firms in Europe. This is an example of what we want to do in an area where we need to have more creativity, more enterprises, more SMEs.
Great, thank you. Carme, your concluding remarks, please.
I would say that we need to work together in a coordinated way between European countries, not to be dependent on third countries in strategic subjects like digital sovereignty or technological sovereignty, but always allowing that Europe is the most attractive place, attracting talent, attracting innovation, attracting investment and competitive, but based on the respect of the European values.
Great, thank you, Carme. And Jean-David.
I will have difficulties to say better things than what just said by the minister, but maybe I would insist on building a future which is a sustainable, resilient future for our children. In fact, this is what is at stake at the end of the day. And in this context, I mean, it's clearly startups and small and medium enterprise that will play a key role. And it is a duty of public bodies to create the conditions for them to flourish and to bring the solution to the challenges we have. So I think that if we are able to have this objective, and we are doing it all together at national level, at regional level, at EU levels, on the basis of our values, I mean, there is no reason why we should not succeed.
Thank you very much, Jean-David. Well, we've heard about the challenges of supporting SMEs in Europe, the political and social context, the importance of quick and easy access to capital, and whether or not we should be looking to build up firms to compete on the world stage. Thank you very much indeed to our three panellists for joining us here this afternoon. And thank you also, those of you tuning in online, and also those of you in person here, for joining us. But don't go anywhere yet, because up next we have a closing interview with Matthias Kormann, Secretary General of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, who will be speaking to Politico's Paola Tamma. Thank you.
On stage as soon as we can provide seating for you. The man doesn't need an introduction, of course, but you may not know that he's actually Belgian. I discovered that when I was reading up on him, and Australian, of course. We have a very short amount of time, so I'll jump right in it. Last week you put out an economic outlook which severely shaped growth for the world, and in particular for Europe, you painted a dire picture. So if a number of conditions materialize, rising interest rates, which it looks like they will, further increase in energy prices, and a potential shortage of gas supply, then you can see a number of countries on the brink or in a recession next year. Can you tell us what is your top recommendation to EU policymakers to avoid such a scenario from materializing?
Well, firstly, it is true that our economic outlook, our global economic outlook last week was much more pessimistic than the outlook we released 6 months earlier. Instead of 4.5% global growth, we're now looking at 3% global growth, and for that to this year. And the inflation outlook is about double, just under 9% across OECD member countries, I should say. I mean, look, in Europe, obviously there's some particular specific challenges related, to the geographic proximity, related to the energy market connection to, Russian oil and gas, in particular. And this will have to be worked through structurally. I mean, it will need to accelerate the energy transition in Europe, and in the short term, it'll be important to provide the necessary fiscal support, in particular at the low income and in a very very targeted, temporary targeted, means-tested way. I mean, in terms of the competitiveness of Europe in general, I mean, a whole range of issues that were obviously discussed by the previous panel, I mean, from innovation, optimizing the green and digital transition and transformations of the economy, and the whole spectrum, and making sure, though, that, in terms of the particular challenges caused by the war, they are addressed as effectively as possible.
Thank you. I want to switch topics to the OECD broker global tax deal, which is currently making its motions to become a reality. But here in Europe, we have one country, Poland, which is currently blocking. We will see on Friday if that blockage will come to an end. And in the US, meanwhile, it looks set to block the other part of the deal, the provision of the reallocation of taxing rights. How concerned are you that this really historic agreement, as you hailed it, will never see the light of day?
Well, look, I remain quietly optimistic that it will be implemented. I mean, it was never going to be easy. It was a historic deal, and it was a deal designed to make our international tax arrangements fairer and work better in a digitalized, globalized world economy. And I think the reasons for it are there for all to see. They're very obvious. We need both Pillar 1, the reallocation of taxing rights, and Pillar 2, the global minimum tax. I mean, the European Union, the European Commission, acted very swiftly in terms of initiating the necessary directive, and that is now going through its internal processes, within the European level. And look, I'm quietly optimistic that this will ultimately pass and ultimately come into effect, but slightly delayed compared to what we initially had hoped for.
In terms of trade, there is supply chain disruption, which is contributing to inflation, of course. And also, if we don't get to this type of global level agreement, are you scared that we will see a nearshoring, fragmentation, a separation of supply chains? Is that what we're going towards?
You're talking about tax?
No.
Sorry.
Switch the topic.
We don't get to which agreement?
Well, also, if we don't reach an agreement on the global tax deal, will we see a proliferation, like in the EU, of digital levies and more fragmentation in the regulatory environment?
Look, obviously, global markets and global trading systems have come under significant pressure through two major shocks. We've had the pandemic-induced supply shock, and then followed earlier this year by the supply shock caused by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Now, it's going to be very important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Global trade, having efficiently operating global markets has been important in the past. It will be important in the future. But of course, we need to ensure we learn the lessons of where issues have occurred in terms of supply chain resilience and I guess even just the logistics of moving products around the world. What I would say, though, in the wake of the pandemic, supply chains have actually proved to be much more resilient than what people sort of often appear to perceive when you sort of just listen to the general messaging. I mean, one of the challenges in 2021 was that the recovery from the pandemic, economically speaking, around the world was so strong and so rapid. The demand recovery was so strong and so rapid. But the composition of the demands shifted quite significantly, and the supply chains around the world weren't able to catch up. There was a change in composition of demand in 1 year that would normally take 5 to 10 years. And add to that issues like the impact of zero COVID policies in China and restrictions in terms of getting products out of ports, and given how important China is as part of the global supply chain. So that's where you saw some of those issues. Now, in relation to the impact of the war in Ukraine, the particular concern, of course, relates to food, like the trade in wheat. Ukraine is a massive net exporter of wheat, in particular into countries like across North Africa and the Middle East, and there are some real challenges in front of the world that will need to be addressed. The thing is, global supply of wheat is actually, over the last 12 months, was actually higher than it was in the previous 12 months. The problem is the challenge of getting it into markets efficiently. And what I would say, we need more open markets, and we need to avoid export restrictions and any other measures that make it harder to get products into those parts of the world where they're most needed.
Thank you. On climate now, you have pitched a different approach. Let me just find it, an inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches. Can you explain where you're at in this process and what is actually the end goal of this?
So, the world urgently needs more ambitious, more effective action on climate change, and more countries around the world have or are in the process of committing themselves to net zero emissions. But the challenge is one. Commitments are great, but actual outcomes as a result of actual measures is what ultimately matters. And this is a space. It's a global challenge, and the measures taken in individual countries can have consequences on other countries and on the rest of the world for better or for worse. And if we want to solve the global climate change challenge, we need a globally more coherent, better coordinated approach. And the challenge is that we have different approaches to carbon mitigation all around the world that don't necessarily all that well connected, and we believe that there is a real need for better data, better information, a better evidence base on the comparative effectiveness of different carbon mitigation around the world, which sort of improve the transparency and the information available in the public domain, which we believe will help inform decisions around the world, but also we want to provide a platform for dialogue involving advanced, emerging market and developing economies to I guess, try to develop a globally more coherent approach to carbon mitigation, modeled on what we have done in terms of our international tax reform work.
So is there a policy? Could it be a global carbon price floor?
Well, you know, in the end, if you want to have an inclusive forum and an inclusive conversation, the first step is to take what everybody is doing. All these countries that have committed themselves to reach carbon neutrality, map all of the different measures, and start to provide more rigorous analysis, rather than to come with sort of an upfront prescription as part of that process. I mean, clearly, explicit, carbon pricing is a very efficient way to help reduce emissions, but not every country is doing it that way. And the question is, how can you ensure that across the broad spectrum of different measures that countries are deploying, how can we make it work the best possible way at a global level, and minimizing the risk of negative spillovers, on a cross-border basis?
The EU has presented and is going forward with a carbon border tax that is imposing a tariff effectively on products coming into the EU, which they consider to be highly polluting or more polluting than what we produce here. Is that a positive development, or does that risk retaliatory measures and to diminish the willingness of moving forward toward a common goal?
Well, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, in the absence of an appropriately comprehensive global framework on carbon mitigation efforts, is a way to ensure that you can lift your level of ambition and effort without harming your international competitiveness, and without just sending emissions into other parts of the world. Because, I mean, in the end, what we want is we want all individual jurisdictions to be able to lift their level of ambition and effort without sending economic activity, jobs and emissions into other parts of the world, where for the same level of output, emissions would be higher. Now, if we, in an ideal scenario, you would have a global agreement that helps to avoid that risk. But in the absence of such a global agreement, then, self-evidently, it makes sense for the European Union to say, well, as we lift ambition and effort, we don't want to harm our international competitiveness just for the, to then send emissions into other parts of the world. That doesn't solve the problem and causes, unfair issues over here.
Thank you. And then one final question. You're now 1 year into your mandate. What is your top priority for the rest of it?
Well, look, I mean, there's a range of high priorities, clearly working with governments around the world to help optimize the strength and the quality of the recovery post-COVID and in the wake now of this war is a high priority. Providing and supporting global leadership on climate change, helping to optimize seizing the benefits of the digital transformation while better managing some of the risks that are associated with it, and also making our contribution to help make the international trading system work better. I mean, these are some of the areas that we're very focused on.
Thank you so much. Good luck with all of that. And thank you for all the audience to being with us. I'll let you leave because I know you have a train to catch. But I would like to invite you to...
Thank you.
To stay along, because we have a special guest. My colleague Sarah Wheaton wants to just invite you for a networking drink. She has recently relaunched the EU Influence newsletter, so please talk to her about what that is all about. And then just tomorrow, we will begin at 9 a.m. with an interview with Executive Vice President Margaret Vestager, moderated by my colleague, Competition Technology Editor Aoife White. So be with us also tomorrow, online or here. Thank you so much.
For letting me crash your event. Thanks to all of you.
I think that's for the online version.